Chapter 61. What is he doing here? You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Xiong Rugang had to take 2 days off due to an ankle injury. Jiang Rulan went to the news center alone in the morning and returned to the company in the afternoon, only to see a red Ferrari parked in front of the entrance. Whose car is this? When do such luxury cars appear in their company parking lot? As she thought about it, her pace did not slow down and froze when she saw someone familiar standing at the entrance. Qin Gingxin. How can he be in a place like this? F***ck. Without hesitation, Jiang Rulan turned and ran in the opposite direction. She jogged to the other side of the road, skirting around the tree trunk before stopping. She secretly peeked from behind the tree and glanced at the company entrance, as well as the red Ferrari. F***ck. Today was indeed a bad day for her. Why did he come to H-City? Didn't he migrate to the United States a few years ago? Why did the editor-in-chief treat him with respect? The company name was Qin, don't tell me it belongs to the Qin family. She had once thought that this Qin was different from Qin family, but now it looks like she has made a mistake. If she worked with a devil like Qin Gingxin, wouldn't she be like selling herself to a wolf? No, he certainly did not know that she was working here. After a moment of hesitation, Jiang Rulan chose to contact the office to request leave. However, her phone rang first. She received a call from an unknown phone number. Where else do you want to hide? Do you think I can't see you from behind the tree? A burst of evil laughter came from the phone. Jiang Rulan's face turned pale as she felt cold in her spine. She suddenly poked her head out of the tree and looked back at the company. Sure enough, Qin Gingxin stood there with a smile on his face, asking to be beaten. Jiang Rulan ended the call with a snort. She took a deep breath and glared sharply at the smiling man who was wearing a leather jacket. No more running. Qin Gingxin smirked. Jiang Rulan had no choice but to walk back to the entrance of the company. My dear little red face. Why did you run away from this grandfather? That brat did not consider her displeasure at all. Qin Gingxin immediately walked towards Jiang Rulan, lifted her chin, then humbly lowered his head to look at her. Jiang Rulan pushed his hand away. With a face like a defensive wolf, she took a step back. Aren't you supposed to be in America? What are you doing here? Hey, why are you always angry? Seeing her displeasure face, Qin Gingxin put his arm around her shoulder. As Jiang Rulan struggled, he brought his head close to her face and said with a smile, It's been 7 years, and you are still so stubborn. Chapter 62. Boyfriend, you are listening at NovelFull.audio. Take your smelly claws away. She gave him a look. When Qin Gingxin heard this, he hugged her tightly. Just when Jiang Rulan was about to get angry, he suddenly lowered his head and approached her face closer. Jiang Rulan immediately turned her face away. Her face was full of wariness. Qin Gingxin's smile immediately faded as he let go of her shoulder. He sighed with a disappointed expression, Aya. You are so heartless. Don't you miss me? Missed your ass. Jiang Rulan glared at him. She hadn't forgotten how this little bastard was always with Jiang Bingqin and bullying her. At that time, Qin family and Jiang family lived in 2 adjoining villas on the same courtyard in Ji City. Ever since she went to primary school and high school, as long as Qin Gingxin and Jiang Bingqin were in the yard, she never had a happy day. Back then, this brat did not go to school because he was 4 years older than her. When she was still in 1st grade, he came to her class to cause trouble and dragged her in search of a bird's nest. No matter how reluctant she was, he pulled her arm and forced her to accompany him. This was still considered light. He once had the heart to pull her out to find a beehive, then ran after acquiring a beehive, leaving her alone in the mountains. That night, when she came home crying, her whole face was red and swollen like a rubber ball. BDNV one night, he tried to climb to her balcony in the middle of the night and ran to her bed while making a scary face, scaring her to death. But what Jiang Rulan didn't know was, Qin Gingxin had no ill intentions towards her. He just liked to bully her and won't allow others to bully her. Sometimes when he found out that she was beaten by Jiang family, he will rush to help her, applied medicine on her wounds, and even take turns sending food to her with Jiang Yijuan, so she did not starve to death. And what she hated most was when she was young, her cheek easily reddened. No matter if it was winter or summer, her face was always flushed, and that's why Qin Gingxin called her Little Red. This name accompanied her childhood life until she left Jiang family. Hey! Since when did you learn to curse? Qin Gingxin stared at Jiang Rulan in wonder. Since when I can't curse? Jiang Rulan snorted. Damn! Where did you learn to be a sharp tongue? Where is my Little Red? I really miss her. Give her back to me. Qin Gingxin shook her shoulder violently. Let go. Let go of me. You made me dizzy. Qin Gingxin immediately fell silent. He narrowed his eyes before turning his gaze to her chest. Not bad, not bad. You are much bigger than when you were 17 years old. Jiang Rulan rolled her eyes. Has it been several hundred years since you last saw a woman? I still have to go to work. Can you please not block my way? I have taken leave for you. An evil laugh came from behind her. Jiang Rulan stopped and looked at Qin Gingxin in disbelief. Why are you doing this? It's because I'm your boyfriend. Qin Gingxin pointed his hand to the parking lot. Let's go, baby. Come and spend the day with me. Chapter 63. Who is your girlfriend? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jiang Rulan almost stumbled when she was pushed into the car by Qin Gingxin. She cursed him for 1,000 times in her heart. The wind blew from the red Ferrari until it finally stopped at the side of the road. Jiang Rulan pushed open the car door as if she was being chased by something and threw herself to the side of the road, bending over while retching. What is it this time? I haven't done anything to you yet. Scram. Jiang Rulan quickly deflected Qin Gingxin's hand that was trying to support her. She glared at him with a deathly pale face. Who would drive like that? You won't even slow down even after crossing the loop. Who wouldn't get car sick? As she said this, she retched again. She turned her face towards Qin Gingxin, making an exaggerated expression as if she was about to vomit. Sure enough, he leaped 3 feet into the air and jumped back several meters. Jiang Rulan could not hold back her laughter. Are you messing with me? Qin Gingxin took a few steps back. When he saw Jiang Rulan secretly laughing at him, his face turned black and he walked back towards her. He looked at her pale face. Should we go to the hospital? No. Please don't. Let me breathe some fresh air here. With your racing skills, I can't take it anymore. Jiang Rulan raised her hand to her chest while taking a deep breath. After she finally managed to hold back the nauseous feeling, she looked at the building in front of her. Where are we? My house. Qin Gingxin smiled. Before Jiang Rulan could react, she was forcibly pushed by Qin Gingxin into his house. Why did you bring me here? Do you want to go to the hotel? Doing something like this is more suitable in my house. It will take quite a while until I am satisfied playing with you, Qin Gingxin. I'm not joking with you. I'm not joking with you either. Then I won't enter. That's not something you can decide. Hey. Since when are you getting more overbearing? Why did you tell the doorman that I was your girlfriend? Who is your girlfriend? Who wants to be your girlfriend? You, gosh. Instead of feeling touched, I feel like this is a nightmare. You are my nightmare. Do you understand the meaning of nightmares? In the end, Jiang Rulan was pushed into his house. She was willing to follow him because she knew Qin Gingxin would not do anything to her. When she walked through the door, she no longer felt awkward and immediately shook his, Qin Gingxin, hand. She then sat on the couch in the living room, took off her high heels and threw her shoes to his body. You actually dare to act so arrogantly with me after not seeing me for a few years, right? Just wait. Wait until these grandfather's friends arrive and have a drink with me. I will take care of you tonight. Qin Gingxin held Jiang Rulan's shoes and looked at her little feet. He smiled mischievously. What is it? You called someone else to come here too? Yes, I came to H City to visit him. I did not think I would see your name on the desk when I met the editor. Chief. As he spoke, Qin Gingxin took out a glass of juice from the fridge. Jiang Rulan took the glass and looked around while sitting on the sofa. She sized up his European-style room and casually asked, "Who is your friend? Since I don't know him, don't make him think we're related." But when did we not have such a relationship? Qin Gingxin looked back. Jiang Rulan immediately put down her glass and looked at him. Just as she was about to spit on him, the doorbell rang. When she saw Xian Zihao appeared at the door, the fruit juice she had just swallowed was actually sprayed from her mouth. Chapter 64. My woman, you are listening at novelfull.audio. President Xian is so busy that he is willing to hand over his little house to me for a while. You really can't. Little Red, what happened to you? Qin Gingxin was standing in front of the door, laughing out loud when he heard Jiang Rulan coughing. Jiang Rulan, who was already coughing her lungs out, could not resist burying her face on the sofa. She was coughing more violently. Oh heaven! Oh earth! Just King hack me to death, please. A certain girl wailed miserably in her heart. Cough! 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 The moment Qin Gingxin opened the door, Xian Zihao immediately saw Jiang Rulan sitting on the sofa in the middle of the living room. Surprise flashed across his face in the blink of an eye. Qin Gingxin quickly walked towards Jiang Rulan. He patted her back. Are you all right? Could it be that the juice had expired? Impossible, I just bought it at the supermarket yesterday. Cough. No, no. I'm fine. Jiang Rulan tried to hold back the cough. She rubbed her throat and coughed until her voice sounded hoarse. I'm good. She couldn't say that she was so shocked to see Xian Zihao that she almost choked to death. It seemed that burying her face on the sofa was useless. She massaged her throat with difficulty as she felt Xian Zihao's eyes on her. Zihao, come in and sit down. Seeing Jiang Rulan was fine, Qin Gingxin smiled. We are all family here, don't be strangers. Family. Jiang Rulan and Xian Zihao said simultaneously. Qin Gingxin's peach blossom eyes were slightly curved as he leaned on the sofa where Jiang Rulan was sitting. He leaned his head closer to her. He then turned his eyes to Xian Zihao with a triumphant face. She is the little red I mentioned to you in America. She is now my girlfriend and soon, she will be my wife. Before Jiang Rulan recovered from the shock of seeing Xian Zihao, she was once again frightened by Qin Gingxin's words. She looked at him as if she had seen a ghost. Xian Zihao raised his eyebrows slightly. Girlfriend. His meaningful gaze fell on the stunned Jiang Rulan, and the corner of his mouth curled. He's Xian Zihao, my good brother who shared life and death with me when I was studying at Harvard. Don't underestimate him, even though he is in this country, he has helped me a lot. He's definitely good enough to be a good brother to me, but this brother has been very busy for the past 2 years to meet with me. Qin Gingxin got up and put his arm around Xian Zihao's shoulder. I heard that you were in Beijing a few days ago. Did you come back because you knew I was coming? Xian Zihao smirked. No matter how busy I am, I can't resist from seeing your face. Ha! I knew it. I knew you missed me too. Qin Gingxin smiled. He quickly walked to the wine cabinet in the corner of the living room. As Qin Gingxin turned to open the wine cabinet, Jiang Rulan, who was gradually recovering from her shock, was greeted with a stern look. She panicked and wanted to explain when Qin Gingxin suddenly turned around with a bottle in his hand. I remember you liked red wine. This is Lafite from 82. Do you want to try it? This time, I deliberately collected 10 bottles, all of which are the most authentic and genuine products. Xian Zihao took the bottle and looked at the number on it. 10 bottles. You brat, since when you have been so generous? What are you trying to say? You should appreciate it. TSK. Qin Gingxin crossed his arms over his chest. Say, why did you decide to go home? You had managed your Xian company overseas well, and then suddenly, you decide to take control of Xian Group. No matter what, you shouldn't leave your life in Boston just because of a woman. Xian Zihao pursed his lips and did not say a word. How good was it back then? Qin Gingxin sighed as he looked at Xian Zihao, who seemed undisturbed. Was it worth losing your freedom because of a woman? Jiang Rulan suddenly felt that it was not appropriate for her to be here. No matter how curious she was about the woman Qin Gingxin talking about, it was not something she deserved to know. She picked up her bag and walked quickly to the door. I still have work to do. I will be leaving first. Hey, stop right there. How could Qin Gingxin let her off just like that? Just sit there. We'll have dinner together soon. You guys go, I won't. BDNV. Xian Zihao, who had been silent all this time, suddenly shifted his gaze and gave her a glance. Jiang Rulan stopped in her tracks. She thought for a moment and said, I mean, since both of you haven't met each other for a while, there are definitely a lot of things you wanted to talk about. It's uncomfortable for me to stay here, so I'd better go back first. Why do you have to feel uncomfortable? Are you afraid that both of us will eat you? Qin Gingxin's face gradually became displeased and he glared at Xian Zihao. Zihao is not an outsider and you are my woman. Why do you have to be ashamed? Sit down. Jiang Rulan bit her lip. Did this stinky brat really consider her his girlfriend? Since when did she become his? Jiang Rulan frowned and warned that damned brat to shut up and stop talking nonsense with her eyes. Qin Gingxin, who was staring at her, immediately raised his eyebrow. Why are you still standing there? If you are bored, quickly go to the kitchen and pour Zihao something to drink. He is our guest. Jiang Rulan was devastated. Qin Gingxin, can you shut up? Xian Zihao just stared at Jiang Rulan, clearly did not mean to take part in the fight between the two of them. From start to finish, he had a faint and unpredictable smile on his face. Qin Gingxin suddenly felt ashamed. He happily introduced her to his best brother, and not only did she not give him face at all, but she even made him feel embarrassed. Qin Gingxin glared at Jiang Rulan sharply. Jiang Rulan. Jiang Rulan glared back at him furiously. She wasn't an idiot and she can naturally see the meaning behind his gaze. She wasn't his wife or his mother, so why did she have to go along with this bastard? At the same time, she also saw a dark smile on Xian Zihao's face. Jiang Rulan was so angry and reluctantly entered the kitchen. When she returned with a glass in her hand, Qin Gingxin was already sitting on the sofa with Xian Zihao. They talked about something, both smiling and looking in a good mood. But she was in a bad mood. Jiang Rulan unhappily placed a glass of water on the coffee table in front of Xian Zihao. Xian Zihao's glistening eyes landed on her face, and a devilish smile appeared in his eyes. Qin Gingxin frowned. There are so many drinks in the fridge. How do you know Zihao likes plain water? Xian Zihao was about to take his glass but his hand froze at the edge of the glass. Jiang Rulan was startled. She looked at the glass of water on the coffee table, then looked at Xian Zihao, then looked back at Qin Gingxin's frowning expression, which looked like he was eating something wrong. When she was in the kitchen, she actually did not overthink. At first, she wanted to take a bottle of water from the fridge, but when she saw the water dispenser, she remembered the day Xian Zihao brought her to Greenville residence. He also drank plain water, so she unknowingly poured a glass of water for him. However, when Qin Gingxin asked this question, she panicked. Not knowing how to answer it, she replied, "I just poured a glass of water when I saw the water dispenser there." Without batting an eyelid, Xian Zihao took the glass and sipped it. Jiang Rulan pouted. She really didn't know what to say in this situation. 2 months ago, news between her and Xian Zihao had long circulated in and out of H City for a long time. Now Qin Gingxin had appeared, although the news was gone, he had a wide connection, so it wasn't quite possible for him not knowing the news from 2 months ago. Chapter 65. My Little Red. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing that Xian Zihao didn't seem to want to say anything, Jiang Rulan didn't feel right to open her mouth. Instead, she stood with an unhappy look on her face and stared at Qin Gingxin. Then, "Do you remember what I like?" Qin Gingxin asked her. "How can I remember?" Jiang Rulan was about to say no, but when she saw the pain in the man's eyes, she angrily returned to the kitchen. She took out a bottle of watermelon juice from the fridge and put it in front of him. When Qin Gingxin saw Jiang Rulan taking out a watermelon-flavored drink, he immediately smiled. "You actually remember it. Not bad at all. I must reward you tonight." Jiang Rulan felt a sudden shiver. The temperature in the living room suddenly dropped. She quietly clenched her fists and warned him, "Qin Gingxin. If you keep talking nonsense, I will sew your mouth." Qin Gingxin was amused. Ignoring Xian Zihao's presence, he quickly grabbed Jiang Rulan's wrist, pulling her next to him. Jiang Rulan's feet were unsteady, and when Qin Gingxin grabbed her, she fell down on the sofa. Then Qin Gingxin's slender body fell on her and said coquettishly, "What are you sewing? Can't you cover it with your mouth?" Jiang Rulan screamed and pushed him away with all her might when he wanted to kiss her. Fortunately, Qin Gingxin actually did not want to do anything to her. Seeing that she was fighting hard, he let her go. Jiang Rulan jumped like a frightened grasshopper and walked away from him. Her eyes were full of caution as she stared at the damned idiot. She also felt a cold look from Xian Zihao. Somehow, Jiang Rulan actually felt guilty. It's not like she did something embarrassing. All this mess was caused by this grandpa, who didn't know her relationship with Xian Zihao. So why should she feel guilty? Jiang Rulan took a deep breath, took her bag and left without saying a word. She was so fast that Qin Gingxin did not have time to stop her. As she walked out of the building and reached the side of the road to stop the taxi, Qin Gingxin grabbed her wrist. "Rulan. Let go." Seeing an empty taxi pass by, she impatiently shook him off, but Qin Gingxin instead turned her body towards him. He saw the anger in her eyes and asked, "Are you mad at me? I just teased you. I did not think you would. Do you think your actions are that funny?" Jiang Rulan tried to push him but failed. "All right, it's all my fault. Zihao is still here, why don't you give me my face? It's been 7 years since we last met, and you wanted to leave before we could talk. Are you trying to hurt my heart?" Jiang Rulan was silent. Qin Gingxin lowered his head and smiled coquettishly towards her. "You maybe have a sharp tongue, but I know you have a soft heart." The golden light spread to the sky, accompanied by the night light. The wind was blowing, causing the greenery on both sides of the road to dance non-stop. On the 15th floor of the building, it wasn't difficult to saw a figure standing at the thick windows. Xian Zihao looked at the figures that stood so intimate by the side of the road with a calm expression. In his mind, he remembered the little girl Qin Gingxin had mentioned to him. "I've had enough of life in G City." At that time, the Qin family already had a huge business company, but becoming a CEO was not my dream. My biggest dream was to bring my little Red away from Jiang family. My little Red, she's very cute and good looking, her face always red. I liked to tease and watched her angry expression like a rubber ball that will explode. It's hilarious. The girl is stubborn, but I really like her character. Since I was little, I've always believed that she will be my wife. Even if I bullied her until she cries, she would definitely love me. Plus, I believe that over the years of love, I can definitely steal her heart and make her love me. She's gone. On the 15th day of the first month of the year, my little Red ran away from home with her brother and never returned. I waited and searched all over G City, but I couldn't find her. Everything Qin Gingxin said played around in Xian Zihao's mind. He lowered his head and no one could see his expression. The street bar was brightly lit at 11 p.m., and the pub's atmosphere was boisterous. Under the colorful lights on the dance floor, Jiang Ruolin walked out of the bathroom and saw the two men sitting to the left of the room. She helplessly walked in that direction. Qin Gingxin has been drinking with Xian Zihao non-stop. After dinner, they came to this pub. As soon as these two men entered, they attracted the attention of countless women. They had been here for 3 hours and it was still not enough. Zihao, let me tell you. Qin Gingxin shakily lifted his hand and placed it on Xian Zihao's arm. His eyes were half open as he grinned and patted his, Xian Zihao, arm twice. I'm happy today. As Jiang Ruolin walked back to the VIP room, she saw Qin Gingxin's wolf claws grab Xian Zihao's arm. She looked at him sympathetically. When Xian Zihao noticed her gaze, his eyes shifted to her face. He saw a glimpse of red in her eyes. Tired. This is more than just fatigue. Why didn't you stop him from drinking too much? Jiang Ruolin put her hand on her hip and looked at Qin Gingxin, who was still immersed in his own world. It's been one night. How can he talk so much nonsense? Xian Zihao just smiled. His black eyes seemed to be covered by a layer of mist under the flickering light. His silver-gray shirt collar was slightly open because of the 3 buttons he had undone and his sleeves were also rolled up to his elbows casually. His tall body sat on the sofa, with one hand was held by Qin Gingxin while the other hand casually leaned on the back of the couch. Qin Gingxin, a beautiful man who was arrogant and graceful, was enough for everyone to see. Add Xian Zihao, who was very charming, so it wasn't surprising if they both attracted many women's attention. Jiang Ruolin's presence didn't seem to be hated by all the women in the room. She took the glass wine from Qin Gingxin's hand. Young Master Qin, are you done? Why are you so anxious? Qin Gingxin did not take the glass, instead, he grabbed Jiang Ruolin's wrist, pulling her towards him. She's trying to dodge his hand, but since she had no strength that can be compared to Qin Gingxin's, her efforts were just a waste. She fell next to him. His wolf claw wrapped around her waist. Qin Gingxin smiled as he whispered into her ear. It's rare for me to be so happy, but why do you want to ruin my mood? You. Jiang Ruolin put her hand between their bodies. Qin Gingxin did not care whether this was a public place or not. He pulled Jiang Ruolin into his arms tightly, lowering his head, and wanted to kiss her. Jiang Ruolin hurriedly looked at Xian Zihao, who was sitting next to him. She pleads for his help. Xian Zihao looked at the helplessness in her eyes with a smile. He did not move. Jiang Ruolin looked at his indifference in disbelief. She hurriedly raised her hand to cover Qin Gingxin's moving mouth while turning her head to look at Xian Zihao. Gritting her teeth, she yelled, no matter how good your relationship is with him, are you willing to share your wife with him? Seeing that she had gone mad, Xian Zihao smiled. He was about to call the waiter to settle the bill, but his hand suddenly froze in the air. In the blink of an eye, he looked at the woman who was unrelenting with her words. Jiang Ruolin was glaring at him angrily while pushing Qin Gingxin's claws. Her eyes were filled with dissatisfaction and anger. Xian Zihao lowered his hand and leaned back on the sofa. His voice was low and deep, but it seemed distant. Are you sure you want me to help you? Chapter 66. Why do you have to be so scared? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Do you really need my help? Jian Rulan glared at Xian Zihao sharply. They both did not talk, just watched each other. Xian Zihao's calm look seemed to try to penetrate her sanity mask and touched something inside her. Jian Rulan quickly controlled her expression, and her helplessness and hatred quickly turned into sadness. Every time she confronted Xian Zihao, she felt he was trying to break her wall and seeing the real her. It was an uncomfortable feeling. While Jian Rulan was busy with her thoughts, Qin Gingxin's head fell on her shoulder. She was stunned for a moment, then tried to push his head away. Qin Gingxin immediately fell asleep because he drank too much alcohol, and if he suddenly woke up, he might drag them both to drink alcohol again. That's why they should send him back now. Xian Zihao called the waiter to settle the bill while looking at her. Help me bring him to the parking lot. Jian Rulan said nothing and immediately helped lifted Qin Gingxin's body, which was about 1.82 m tall like Xian Zihao, with some difficulty. I don't want to. I'm not going home. Zihao, let's continue drinking. I don't want to go home. Little Red, why do you have 3 heads? Qin Gingxin waved his hand while being helped by Jian Rulan. Qin Gingxin. Don't move. I will help you get into the room and sleep. Reluctantly, Jian Rulan helped him into his bedroom. Just as she opened the bedroom door, Qin Gingxin suddenly fought back. He did not want to enter the room and did not want to sleep. What he wanted now was to continue drinking alcohol. Jian Rulan pushed his body hard. Qin Gingxin's feet gave way and he fell on the bed while grumbling, "Stop pushing me. I will sleep." The corner of Jian Rulan's mouth twitched and she immediately entered the room. She was kind enough to pull the blanket on him, but who would have thought that Qin Gingxin would suddenly pull her arm to the bed? She gasped as she tried to release her hand from his grip. When she lifted her head, she saw Xian Zihao walked into the room. Her face immediately flushed and then white. Jian Rulan quickly stood by the bed. She didn't know what she should do now. She pointed towards a certain drunkard on the bed. He tried to pull my arm. I have nothing to do with it. The living room was lit, but the bedroom was dark. From where Jian Rulan was standing, she could not see Xian Zihao's expression, but as he walked towards her, she quickly ran out of the bedroom as if something scary was chasing after her. Qin Gingxin rolled over on the bed and bit his lip. Xian Zihao grabbed the blanket and threw it at him. He turned on the light in the bedroom and heard him, Qin Gingxin, mutter in his drunken state, "Little Red, don't cry. Don't cry. No one will dare to hit you again. Don't always be alone. Hide under a tree. Don't cry. Don't be afraid." Xian Zihao paused. His eyes shifted to the slender figure in the living room. Jian Rulan ran to the kitchen to get a glass of water and walked back. When she saw Xian Zihao walking out of the bedroom, she asked, "Don't you want him to drink water first? When someone is drunk, his mouth will be parched. He's sleeping. Leave the water here, he'll drink it when he wakes up tomorrow." He gave her a bland look. "I'll take you back." Xian Zihao's voice was always so calm, but it had a seductive charm. If it weren't for Han Shuigang who had torn her wounded heart, Jian Rulan might have fallen in love with him. For a man like Xian Zihao, it's like poison. He didn't need to say or do anything, just by standing there was enough to break the defenses in women's hearts. Jian Rulan did not follow him walking out the door. She stood in the living room and watched his figure disappear. Although she could still get a taxi during this time, she couldn't turn down Xian Zihao's offer without reason. Before, they were stranger, but now that they were married, why did she reject his good intentions? So she decided to follow him. Jiang Rulan saw Xian Zihao standing in front of the newly opened elevator door, looking back at her. She slowed down. She took a deep breath and then walked briskly without looking at his expression. Xian Zihao quickly followed her from behind and stood in front of her. The elevator door quietly closed and slowly descended. Xian Zihao suddenly turned to look at Jiang Rulan with his black ink eyes. His soft lips curved slightly as he said, "Come here." Jiang Rulan was stunned. She raised her head and saw the happiness in his eyes. She opened her mouth in a daze and only said, "Huh." Xian Zihao laughed a little. "Why are you standing behind me?" "You're President Xian." The answer was pretty neat. Xian Zihao. Xian Zihao frowned for some reason. He suddenly pulled Jiang Rulan's wrist, pulling her towards him. Jiang Rulan was not ready and she staggered standing next to him. A look of astonishment flashed through her clear eyes shortly before the elevator reached the first floor. Before she could shake his hand, Xian Zihao was already taking her out of the elevator. President Xian. Jiang Rulan passively followed Xian Zihao out of the elevator. She tried to free her hand from his grip, but she didn't have much strength and she couldn't escape easily. She could barely follow his long legs. Without even turning his head, Xian Zihao said, "Xian Zihao Ednl.co, what?" Jiang Rulan was taken aback. She looked at him in a daze. She didn't understand why Xian Zihao suddenly said his own name. Xian Zihao took her to his car. While he opened the door, he looked at her. Jiang Rulan froze. Xian Zihao had already let go of her hand. Xian Zihao slightly raised his handsome eyebrows, waiting for Jiang Rulan said his name. Jiang Rulan licked her dry lips and opened her mouth. Xian. Xian Zihao. After that, she quickly walked to the passenger side and opened the door, but she suddenly found the umbrella she had left 2 months ago on the leather seat. Xian Zihao was already in the car. Seeing Jiang Rulan stop at the door, he followed her gaze and took the umbrella, placed it in the glove compartment. Jiang Rulan initially wanted to grab the umbrella and put it back in her bag, but Xian Zihao took it in the blink of an eye. Soon, a black Land Rover drove out of the parking lot and crossed the busy city streets of H City. Yellow lights and bright neon lights shone along the road. The man next to her looked very handsome under the flickering neon light. Jiang Rulan couldn't stop sneaking a glance at him. Xian Zihao then casually slid down the window and placed one elbow on the car window, while the other hand held the steering. A cool breeze blew softly into his face, and he vaguely narrowed his eyes, looking at the road in front of him. Only when the car slowly stopped in front of the red light did he turn his attention to Jiang Rulan. Suddenly, "I found something." His expression did not change as he bit his lip lightly. "When you are with me, you are always hesitant to speak. If there is something you want to say, you can say it out loud. Why do you have to be so scared?" Chapter 67. Your father bullied me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Suddenly, "I found something." His expression did not change as he bit his lip lightly. "When you are with me, you are always hesitant to speak. If there is something you want to say, you can say it out loud. Why do you have to be so scared?" Jiang Rulan's long eyelashes trembled, and the faint orange light from the streetlights fell on her small, white face. The shadow of his long, thick eyelashes almost covered her small face. She said nothing. When she was rational, she will always be careful with her words. Xian Zihao suddenly felt that her action was rather pitiful. It wasn't that she wasn't willful, but Jiang Rulan often restrained her desires and emotions beneath the surface of her composure, though sometimes she would fail. Just like how she cursed when she was forced into a corner, her arrogance was like a hedgehog, and her angry expression when facing Qin Gingxin made her gritted her teeth in anger. Xian Zihao frowned slightly. He suddenly did not like the way Jiang Rulan deliberately hid her behavior in front of him. Actually, Jiang Rulan was fine. She actually wanted to ask Xian Zihao if he can accompany her to the engagement party of Han Shuigang and Ling Feier. However, this thought was abruptly dispelled by her. She felt a little amused. For what reason should Xian Zihao accompany her to an engagement party? Jian Ruolan pursued her lips as she turned her head to look at the man who started driving the car after the green light came on. His driving was still elegant and calm, and his gaze had turned cold. It was evident that he was not very patient with her. Jian Ruolan lowered her eyes to cover the doubts and anticipations that were radiating in her eyes. She almost opened her mouth for a moment, but in the end, she swallowed her words again. There was still time before the engagement party, and maybe she could think of a better way than to ask for help from anyone. When they arrived at Greenville residence, it was late at night. Jian Ruolan thanked him and rushed out of the car, but she did not expect Xian Zihao to enter her house. She stopped and looked back at him. Xian Zihao didn't seem to notice her expression. He smiled lightly and said, "Don't talk about who owns this place right now. Even though this is my house, you should still invite me in after I send you back, right? It's too late. Do you still have time to go in and drink water?" Jian Ruolan's eyes widened in disbelief. "If you invite me, of course I will not refuse." Xian Zihao smiled innocently as he leaned back in his car and tilted his head to look at her. Jian Ruolan's mouth twitched. Her instincts told her that Xian Zihao can be reasonable when doing shameless things. She bit her lip and entered the password for her apartment. As soon as she stepped in, she was stopped by a figure in the living room. Traces of shock passed through Xian Zihao's dark eyes as soon he saw the figure. A middle-aged woman who still maintained her charm awaiting them in the living room. When they entered, she had already turned around and sized them up. "Mom! Why are you here? Mom!" Jian Ruolan froze as the key in her hand fell to the floor with a clatter. As soon as the middle-aged woman saw Xian Zihao, she cried. Xian Zihao sat next to her, handing her a tissue. "Son, I don't want to be with your father anymore. The old fog always bullied me." Jianan took the tissue in Xian Zihao's hand and wiped her tears while sobbing. Jian Ruolan sat quietly next to Jianan, not daring to say anything. However, when she heard her words, she almost laughed, barely keeping her face straight. Xian Zihao had gotten used to her crying. "Aren't you just back from America? How can you two quarrel?" "That's right. I didn't return for so long, but he began to argue with me when I returned. He never tolerated me, so I don't want to stay with him anymore. I only have you, son." "Wu. Son, that your mother was depressed and she could only come to find you." Jianan cried and put her head on Xian Zihao's shoulder. Her tears wet his shirt. "Tell me, why did I marry such a bastard and have to suffer for decades? It's not easy for me to live and manage Guiying in Boston alone. I rarely returned, yet your father bullied me the moment I arrived." Xian Zihao's face darkened. "What really happened? No matter how much I want to know, you should not come here alone in the middle of the night. What time is it now? It's all because of you, little bastard. Why didn't you tell your family that you were married? Your father and grandfather were furious because you did not marry Cui Lucien. I heard that she was hiding in her room all day and cried. They said that you had disappointed them and I have given birth to an unfilial child. Your father is more arrogant. I heard he had oldly brought his daughter-in-law to meet him for approval. The anger he had been holding for 2 months was all vented out on me alone. I just came home 2 days ago and they shouted at me as soon as I arrived. Today, your father kept bothering me, from morning to night, and even scolded me. I can't stand it. Son, I want to divorce your father, I want a divorce." Xian Zihao smiled. "You've been saying these words for over 20 years. Your father used your grandfather to oppress me. As long as he disagreed, he said I can't leave him for the rest of my life. Why should I continue my marriage with this ogre? As she spoke, Jeanne raised her head to look at Jean Rollin, who was sitting on the opposite sofa. Her red eyes stared straight at her, Jean Rollin, making her unable to sit still. I'm the only one talking. Why don't you talk? Jeanne wiped her tears and smiled. Jean Rollin quickly sat up straight and opened her mouth carefully. Auntie. TSK, what auntie? Jeanne stood up and walked closer. She held her little hand tightly. With eyes filled with endless satisfaction, she said, "Good child, shouldn't you immediately change the way you call me?" Ha! I. Jean Rollin stared blankly at the beautiful middle-aged woman in front of her. Jeanne wore a light purple cheapao with dark brown mink skin on her shoulder. She was like a spoiled child crying on her son's shoulder just now, but now she was standing in front of her, smiling. This was Xian Zihao's mother. She's Madame Zhang's elder sister, Jeanne. It was said that General Xian's wife was the leader of a very famous literary and beauty group in the 70s and 80s. Now, it seemed that his daughter-in-law was also following in her footsteps. Jean Rollin didn't know what to do and what to say. Don't be embarrassed, the daughter-in-law must meet her mother-in-law. Shouldn't you call me Mom sooner or later? Jeanne looked at the reserved person before her with a beaming smile. Jean Rollin was a beautiful, clean, white girl, and she also looked like a sensible girl, unlike those kids in their 20s who dress up like flowers all day. To be honest, Jeanne liked a girl like her. Jeanne looked at her son, who was sitting there, pretending to be stupid and oblivious with the situation. Chapter 68. Quickly give me a grandson. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Jean Rollin always felt a bit awkward when meeting old people. She lived in an unfamiliar environment since she was a child until she was 17 years old. She lived alone with Yijuan and rarely meets a good elder. Under Jeanne's gentle gaze, she felt awkward and didn't know what to say. She looked skeptically at someone who was still pretending to be stupid. Mom. Xian Zihao's eyes showed helplessness as he sighed and laughed. Stop forcing her. You're scaring her. Scared. Jeanne was stunned and quickly held Jean Rollin's hand tightly. Good child, don't be afraid. My personality is always like this. If you are not used to it, then it's fine, but you have to quickly give me a grandson. I can't wait to hear your child call me grandma. Jean Rollin kept blinking her eyes. She turned her head to look at Xian Zihao, whose face was completely black. Seeing the two of them behaving like this, Jeanne became unhappy. She glanced at Xian Zihao, who was just sitting there, not talking. Zihao, you've been married for 2 months. Where is my daughter-in-law's wedding ring? Jeanne raised Jean Rollin's hand gently and showed it to Xian Zihao. Is this how you treat my daughter-in-law? Xian Zihao's mouth twitched. Do you have to think this fast? Before, you were talking about grandchildren, and now you are talking about rings. Not just the ring, look at your house, you don't even have a wedding photo. It doesn't matter if you don't have an engagement party, but a wedding should be held. I will think of a way to persuade your father and grandfather. You can't treat my daughter-in-law like this. If someone else is having a wedding, then my daughter-in-law must have it too. Xian Zihao did not know whether to laugh or cry. Jeanne shook Jean Rollin's hand and said with a smile, Good child, see how impatient Mom is. I have been here for a long time but I forgot to ask your name. Auntie. Jean Rollin lowered her head and whispered, My name is Jean Rollin. Your surname is Jiang. Yes. Good, good, your surname is Jiang, and your name is also good. I like it. Jeanne looked for the red packet she had prepared earlier and put it in Jean Rollin's hand. Good child, take it. Auntie, I can't take this. Jean Rollin pushed the thick red packet. She can't accept it. Jeanne gently grabbed her hand. You can't refuse it. Since this is the first time I've met my daughter. In law, I have to give her a red packet. This is a custom in China. But Xian Zihao, sitting next to Jianan, knew that his mother had other intentions when she came at midnight. When he saw Jiang Rulan refuse the red packet, he said, "Just take it. She gave it to you." Jiang Rulan felt this was not a good idea, but since Xian Zihao had already said it, it was not appropriate for her not to accept it. She awkwardly held the thick red packet with both hands and said, "Thank you, Auntie." Zihao stood and sat next to Jiang Rulan. He looked at her with a slight tenderness in his eyes. "You still call her Auntie even though you already accepted the red packet?" Jianan smiled as she tilted her head, watching her son and daughter in law. Jiang Rulan looked at Xian Zihao, who was next to her, with a non-smiling smile. She then turned to look at Jianan, who was smiling at her. Jiang Rulan blinked in embarrassment. It had been 20 years since she uttered that word to anyone, so when she opened her mouth at this moment, she felt a little bothered. "Mom." As the word came out of her mouth, the hand holding the red packet was suddenly tightened. In her mind, Jiang Rulan suddenly remembered the scene where she and Yijuan stood on the roof 20 years ago and watched their mother's body fall from the building. For a moment, she felt lost. Jianan grinned from ear to ear. "This child is really likable." Xian Zihao looked at that time, his words destroyed the warm and harmonious atmosphere. "Mom, it's late. If you don't want to go home, I'll take you to the hotel." Jiang Rulan smiled. "Auntie, sleeping late is not good for your health. You should rest early. Zihao will send you home." "Send what?" Jianan's smile was tinged with a hint of shrewd. She raised her eyebrows slightly and looked around. "Don't we have 2 bedrooms? I'll sleep in the second bedroom, you 2 sleep in the master bedroom." "Nanny." Jiang Rulan was in shock. Xian Zihao frowned. "You want to stay here?" Jianan had already let go of the fur shawl on her shoulder and was about to walk towards the second bedroom when she heard her son's words. "Your mother has been bullied to this extent by your father. Are you willing to let me sleep on the street?" Xian Zihao pursed his lips in silence. Moments later, he said, "Mom, there isn't much furniture in the bedroom. It's not as comfortable as a hotel. I'll take you there first, that hotel. I plan to return to the United States in a month, could you let me stay in a hotel for the whole month?" Jianan looked at her son with a disgusted expression before shifting her attention to Jiang Rulan, who was standing on the side like a statue. "Rulan, can you believe it? Your mom hadn't returned for a long time, but as soon she came here to seek for comfort, this sticking brat wanted to kick me out instead." When her name was called, she hurriedly looked at Jianan, who had eyes full of complaints. Her relationship with Xian Zihao was not what Jianan thought, but when she saw her, Jianan, sad face, what can she say? Jiang Rulan had already called Jianan mom, and if she had refused her request, she, Jianan, would felt a little heartache. Jianan couldn't help but break into a wide grin. Her gaze shifted to Xian Zihao, waiting for his answer. At the same time, she was shooting daggers with her eyes at him. "Son, do you have the heart to let your mother stay alone in a hotel all month?" Xian Shuren held her Hermes bag and looked at them both. Seeing that they were not responding, she immediately walked towards the door with a disappointed look. "Ah, forget it, the old man is angry with me, and the young man does not want me either. It seemed my presence didn't need in this house, and even the boy who always protects me doesn't care about me anymore. I will go, I will go." Xian Zihao began to laugh. "Mom, what are you trying to say?" "All right, you take the master bedroom while Rulan and I can sleep in the second bedroom." Jiang Rulan looked at Xian Zihao in surprise. He took off his suit jacket and threw it on the sofa. Obviously, he will not leave either. Jianan almost reached the door, but hearing Xian Zihao, she turned and walked back with a smile on her face. She looked around the house, opened the door to the second bedroom. Standing inside, she said, "There are only blankets and closets. How do you two live here? We will sleep in that room for tonight. We can talk about other things tomorrow." Xian Ziheo's black eyes glanced at Jiang Ruolin, who was sitting stiffly next to him. Noticing the meaning behind his gaze, Jiang Ruolin immediately smiled at Jianan, who had just walked out of the bedroom. "It's already late. Please rest early." Jianan continued walking to the master bedroom. She opened the door and looked around. "I am very familiar with Ziheo's attitude. He didn't want me to suffer any grievance. If I stayed in that room now, he will definitely don't agree. How about this, let Roland accompany me this weekend. We are going to buy some furniture. I like the bedroom pattern, and when the furniture and everything is ready, I will take the second bedroom. Since you just returned from America, don't worry too much about us." Jiang Ruolin had to abide by her decision. "Ruolin, when you have a child, as a mother, you will understand my feelings. Sometimes, you don't want to worry, but you also have to worry. Which mother will not feel sorry for her child?" Jianan looked at her with a radiant smile, then looked at her stomach meaningfully. Jiang Ruolin immediately closed her mouth and lowered her head. In Jianan's eyes, her action meant she was embarrassed. Jianan smiled. She took the TV remote and played with it for a while before turning on the TV and sitting on the couch at the same time. "You two go to bed. You don't have to stay with me." Jiang Ruolin initially planned to spend the night in her study to arrange a news report for tomorrow while Jianan was sleeping. She didn't think that she, Jianan, would turn on the TV. Jiang Ruolin glanced at Xian Ziheo hesitantly. Xian Ziheo, on the other hand, was sitting on the couch with his hands crossed on his chest. Chapter 69. What Are You Afraid Of? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing that the situation was not good, Jiang Ruolin hurriedly opened her mouth again. "Mom. You should go to bed earlier because there is no good program on TV at this time. My jet lag isn't over yet, I really can't sleep right now. You guys go to bed first, don't worry about me." "But," Jiang Ruolin whispered, about that I used to stay up late. How about this, can I accompany you to watch TV?" "No. Ruolin, you can't stay up late. Staying up late can cause endocrine dysfunction. 1. You just got married to Ziheo and now is the easiest time for you to get pregnant. Who knows, you may already have a baby in your womb. Since we are still uncertain, you definitely can't sleep late. Quickly go to sleep. If you didn't go to sleep now, I would blame both of you for not listening to me." Jianan glanced at Jiang Ruolin, then Xian Ziheo. "Why are you still sitting? Persuade your wife to sleep. Hurry up and go." Jiang Ruolin wanted to protest, but Xian Ziheo was already standing and wrapped his arm around her waist. She looked at him in shock and lowered her head. "Mom isn't an outsider," she said in a low voice. As soon as she said those words, she was immediately taken to the master bedroom, which was already open. As soon as the door closed, Jiang Ruolin felt her entire body go cold. Without waiting for Xian Ziheo to let his grip on her waist go, she quickly grabbed and pressed the light switch on the wall. The light of the lamp illuminated the dark room as bright as daylight. Xian Ziheo casually slipped his hand into his pocket and the corner of his mouth slightly tilted. He looked indifferent at her. "It's one morning." Jiang Ruolin was clearly tired, but he could only lean against the wall and not move. They both stared at each other in silence for about half a minute. Xian Ziheo suddenly lifted his legs and walked towards her. Jiang Ruolin quickly backed away until her back touched the curtain. She hid her hand behind her back and unknowingly grabbed the soft curtain tightly. Xian Ziheo stopped and smiled teasingly. "You sleep first, I'll take a shower." Without waiting for her answer, he opened the door and walked out. Jiang Ruolin was the only one left in the quiet room. She looked hesitantly at the only double bed in the bedroom and felt her scalp tingle. Xian Zihao returned from the bathroom 10 minutes later. The first sight he saw as soon as he entered the room was. Yes, that's right. Jiang Rulan's whole body was wrapped in a blanket and she was lying on the floor. Xian Zihao looked incredulously at the bed, which was left with only pillows and mattresses. Then he looked at the woman who was curled up in the blanket. Jiang Rulan almost fell asleep when she heard his voice. She raised her head and looked at him with a foggy look before looking towards the bed. She yawned while nodding sleepily and said in a low voice, "Summer is almost over and the temperature at night is not too cold. You can cover yourself with a coat while I sleep on the floor." With that, she turned her body towards the window, ready to fall asleep. Xian Zihao looked at her speechlessly. His face was dark. Was he that scary? Go to bed. Jiang Rulan acted as if she did not hear him and just laid there. Xian Zihao frowned and approached her. He pulled the blanket over her body and threw it on the bed without hesitation. Jiang Rulan raised her head in shock and hugged her chest. She curled up in the corner while protecting herself. Xian Zihao stared into her eyes angrily. Get up. I will sleep on the floor. Jiang Rulan lowered her head. She was looking like a hedgehog turned into a turtle hiding in its shell. The floor is cold. Xian Zihao persuaded her patiently. I'm not afraid of the cold. Ah. Before Jiang Rulan finished speaking, her wrist was forcibly grabbed by Xian Zihao. She looked at the flickering flame in his eyes with surprise. She tried to pull back her wrist, but instead, Xian Zihao tightened his grip. Xian Zihao leaned forward and pressed Jiang Rulan hard against the wall, imprisoning her between him and the wall. Jiang Rulan, what are you afraid of? Xian Zihao lowered his head, his face very close to Jiang Rulan, freshness and strange tenderness as he spoke, caressing her nose. Jiang Rulan had no place to retreat. Her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She tried to move her body, but she could only twist it a little even though she tried with all her might. Jiang Rulan realized how close they were to each other. Xian Zihao was not wearing anything under the bathrobe, and she could feel something hardened underneath. She began to tense up. That was the most natural male reaction. Right now, she was in a state of shock and did not dare to move again. Xian Zihao's eyes were getting darker. His gaze seemed to pierce her. All her nerves were tensed. Don't forget that we are husband and wife. He looked at her face intensely. His eyes gradually faded into a misty color, as if the night sky was covered by stars. He stared at her like this for a long time. Jiang Rulan didn't dare to move. Even if she was inexperienced, she's very aware that either sooner or later, they will definitely have sex. The relationship between them was legitimate, and on a night like this, no matter who he was, any normal man would have the desire to do that. Xian Zihao was 100% normal and this made her more afraid to move. She could only stare at his cold eyes with a deadly pale face. His cold gaze seemed to penetrate her again, and she was somewhat unable to restrain herself as she stiffly tilted her head backward. After about half a minute, Xian Zihao still had no intention of letting her go. Jiang Rulan was stuck on the wall for too long. She felt a little uncomfortable and spoke shyly, "Can you let me go?" Xian Zihao didn't move and just looked at her. Jiang Rulan glared at him, only to see him raised his handsome eyebrows. He smiled wickedly at her. Mom said she wanted to play with her grandson. Why don't we start it as soon as possible? Jiang Rulan's body stiffened. The grip in her wrist loosened a little. She quickly pushed Xian Zihao's chest. With a cold expression, she said, "Let go of me." But who would have thought that not only did Xian Zihao not letting her go but he also wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her into his arms. Jiang Rulan was about to scream when Xian Zihao suddenly lowered his head and put his hand over her lips. His dark eyes met her fear eyes. "Shoot, Mom is outside." Jiang Ruolan's eyes widened in surprise when his soft and rough lips landed on hers. Xian Zihao suddenly deepened the kiss, and the arm around her waist tightened. No. Ugh. Jiang Ruolan wanted to resist, but Xian Zihao quickly pushed her hand away. She lifted her foot to stomp hard on his foot, but suddenly he bit her lip harshly and pushing his tongue inside her mouth. Jiang Ruolan's body immediately stiffened and she forced his tongue out. The monotonous little room was suddenly filled with a strange heat. Jiang Ruolan struggled several times to release her body from his grip until she felt the soft kiss became rough. All the clarity in her mind had disappeared, and her clear eyes were clouded. Xian Zihao leaned forward, pressed her against the wall again, and moved his hand relentlessly through the hem of her blouse, caressing the creamy skin. He grabbed her hand and intertwined his fingers with hers. Jiang Ruolan could feel her heart pounding. Xian Zihao bit her lower lips before releasing it. He lowered his head and laughed in her ear. Did you know why I can't resist you? Your glassy eyes were the real culprits. At first, I didn't want to do anything to you tonight, but Jiang Ruolan, you have successfully provoked my ire. Jiang Ruolan ignored his words and took the opportunity to push him away, but Xian Zihao suddenly pulled her waist and pushed her into bed. He once again kissed her lips. His eyes darkened as if all his reason and resistance had disappeared in the blink of an eye. Xian Zihao's hand held the back of her neck, deepening their kiss. Jiang Ruolan didn't know how many women Xian Zihao actually bedded and she didn't want to know. While many women were infatuated with him, there were only a few women involved with him. The woman he had, whether in terms of social interaction or whatever, made her felt dizzy. They both were stuck close to each other. Xian Zihao's bathrobe was already open and his sexy and enchanting collarbone was revealed. He turned his head abruptly and kissed the most sensitive spot under Jiang Ruolan's ear, causing her to shiver uncontrollably while his hand unclasped her bra. Xian Zihao's breathing became rigid. His hands gripped both sides of Jiang Ruolan's body, once again covering her lips. Jiang Ruolan could feel his constraints. Xian Zihao didn't want to scare her. His body was so hot as a fire had burned all his nerves. Xian Zihao suddenly stopped his movement, and he put his head on Jiang Ruolan's neck, gasping for breath. Feeling that he had stopped, Jiang Ruolan opened her eyes, staring blankly at the calm eyes above her. Xian Zihao seemed to have calmed down all of a sudden. The burning desire in his eyes had already mostly disappeared. He just looked at her quietly, looking at her gradually reddening eyes. How many years had it been? Xian Zihao looked at the little woman below him and thought it was a little funny. It had been years since he was so impulsive. When Xian Zihao saw that Jiang Ruolan wanted to sleep in the corner, an unnamed fire appeared in his heart. He just wanted to kiss her to remind her that their relationship was no longer something she can escape just because she wants to, and she didn't need to run away at all. If he wanted to touch her, she would have nowhere to run. But why once he kissed her, he felt the joy in his heart and couldn't help but to deepen their kiss. He couldn't restrain himself from wanting to see her reaction, and he also couldn't resist the desire that spread like the fire of a meadow. How many years has it been? Xian Zihao can't remember how long since he was so impulsive. When Jiang Ruolan saw that Xian Zihao had stopped moving, she hesitantly raised her hand to push him away, but when she saw his chest under the bathrobe, her hands froze in the air. Everywhere she looked, she could clearly see the view under the bathrobe. Suddenly, she didn't know where to put her hand. Although she wanted to push him away, she didn't dare to touch him. Jiang Ruolan was afraid that if she accidentally touched Xian Zihao, he would lose his mind and take her again. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready at all. Seemingly able to read Jiang Ruolan's mind, Xian Zihao suddenly stood up and pulled his bathrobe. He turned away from her and she no longer saw the delicate and alluring skin on his bare upper body. His back was facing her. If you don't want to, I won't force you. Xian Zihao said without looking at her. Jiang Rulan immediately got up as well. She hurriedly pulled the blanket to cover herself and quietly clasped her bra. Xian Zihao never turned to look at her again. He walked to the door and paused. After a moment, he opened the door and left the room. You still not sleeping? Zhang An's voice was heard from the living room. I will sleep after the shower. Xian Zihao replied calmly, but his calmness made others feel suspicious. Didn't you just take a shower? I didn't wash my body clean. This time, Xian Zihao stayed in the bathroom for almost half an hour before he finally returned to the bedroom. Jiang Rulan was sitting by the window, hugging a blanket. She raised her head, looking at him as he entered the room. Xian Zihao took a towel to wipe his wet hair, then walked to the bed and immediately laid down. Jiang Rulan could feel the coldness of his body and could not restrain herself from looking back. The moment he laid down, Jiang Rulan saw his eyes closed and he looked tired. During the day, Xian Zihao was very busy, and the whole company needs him to decide on many big and small projects. Xian's group was a well-known company in the country, and there were too many enemies trying to bring him down. If he was not careful, his reputation will be ruined, and his family's safety will be threatened. Jiang Rulan once heard that if someone took a shower in the middle of the night, the person would become unwell the next day. She felt a little sorry for him. She was just sitting by the window and watching Xian Zihao sleeping. Once she confirmed that Xian Zihao was sleeping, she moved to the bed and shared her blanket with him. This double bed was not that big. Although Jiang Rulan had tried her best to stay away from Xian Zihao, the distance between them was still not that far. Seconds and seconds passed. Suddenly, the man next to her rolled over and wrapped his long arm around her waist. Jiang Rulan abruptly opened her eyes. Her body stiffened. She wanted to push Xian Zihao away, but suddenly he whispered in her ear, I've said it before. I won't force you. Sleep. Xian Zihao's voice was hoarse but hushed. That made Jiang Rulan's heart sink again. Her nose was filled with the smell and aroma of fresh mint from his bath. Somehow, her drowsiness was swept away by the fire of desire. The intimate and hot scene from before was playing in her mind without her realizing it. Jiang Rulan quickly closed her eyes and fell asleep. She slept soundly. Since she was 4, when her mother committed suicide in front of her, this was the first time she had slept soundly. It was a good night's sleep. Xian Zihao opened his eyes and looked down at the woman in his arm. Her body was moving closer to him. A trace of a smile appeared on his face. When this little hedgehog put her thorns away, she looked quite pleasing to the eye. Endocrine dysfunction/disorders are diseases related to the endocrine glands of the body. The endocrine system produces hormones, which are chemical signals sent out, or secreted, through the bloodstream. Chapter 70. Are you sure it's edible? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 70. Are you sure it's edible? Exactly at 6 a.m., the digital clock on the bedside table vibrates. When Jiang Rulan opened her eyes, she found that her body was no longer as cold as it used to be. There was a warm source of heat next to her. Jiang Rulan suddenly turned her head and saw that Xian Zihao was sleeping quietly beside her. His calm face added a touch of serenity and beauty to himself. It was only at this moment, Jiang Rulan finally believed that this extraordinary man was indeed her husband. Seeing that he was still sleeping, she carefully got up. Because she was worried that she would share a bed with Xian Zihao, she didn't change her office clothes last night. Jiang Rulan quietly got out of bed and walking out of the room. She came back late last night, and also because she needs to sleep in the same bed with Xian Zihao, Jiang Rulan deliberately did not take a shower. She's like those women on TV who can shower even when they shared the same room as men. Since Jiang Rulan didn't take a shower last night, her body felt sticky. She hurried to the cloakroom on the second floor to pick up a set of clean clothes and then rushed to the bathroom. After taking a shower, she straightened the wrinkles on her clothes and opened the bathroom door. She was surprised to hear a noise coming from the kitchen. Jian Ruolin quickly walked to the kitchen and saw Zhanan, wearing an apron she had bought at a nearby store, cutting carrots. "Why did you get up so early?" Zhanan looked at Jian Ruolin with a smile. "I think you will be like Guiying, who likes to lie in bed lazily. She will not wake up until 9 o'clock. Go wake up Zihao. In about 10 minutes, we can have breakfast together." "Mom, how can I let you prepare breakfast?" "Let me do it." Jian Ruolin walked hurriedly and took the knife from Zhan An's hand. "No need. I love doing this." Zhan An glanced at her with a smile. "Even though there are a lot of servants at Xian Mansion, I always do my job on my own. I have hands and feet, so I don't need help from anyone else." Jian Ruolin wanted to say something, but when she saw Zhan An glared at her, she stopped. When she came out of the kitchen, she was surprised to see Xian Zihao standing at the kitchen's outside door. He casually adjusted the bathrobe and walked past her while giving her an indifferent look. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Make a sumptuous breakfast for my son and daughter. Law. Healthy beef, carrots, and porridge." Zhan An put sliced carrots into the rice cooker. Jian Ruolin immediately cringed. She stared at the vast size of the carrot pieces and the pot of rice in Zhan An's hand. It was like waiting for a disaster to happen. Xian Zihao tilted his head and looked at the mess in the kitchen. "Are you sure this breakfast is edible?" "Of course. Go take a shower. Later we can have breakfast together," Zhan An said while looking at the two of them who were still standing outside the door. She scolded Xian Zihao, who was laughing like a fox. "I have taken care of your sister abroad for many years. Has your sister ever died from eating my food?" Xian Zihao just smiled and said nothing. He turned and entered the bathroom. Jian Ruolin watched Zhan An cooking silently. Zhan An closed the rice cooker with its lid, but she forgot to set the timer and then started to clean the dishes. Jian Ruolin quietly entered the kitchen and adjusted the timer. Zhan An suddenly turned around and frowned when she saw Jian Ruolin. "What are you doing here?" Mom, let me help you." "No need. I'll do it myself." Zhan An insisted, gesturing for Jian Ruolin to wait outside. Jian Ruolin obeyed, but as she walked out, she suddenly smelled a burnt porridge. She hesitantly turned her head to look at Zhan An, who looked very busy and happy, then left the kitchen with an annoyed expression. The bathroom door was not closed. From her angel, she could clearly saw Xian Zihao standing there. There was white foam on his chin and a razor in his hand. He skillfully and slowly shaved his face. At that moment, Jian Ruolin didn't know how to explain her feelings. Her numb heart was suddenly beating faster and she couldn't tell what that feeling felt like. A man who can seduce a woman in the early morning really deserves his reputation. No matter how strong his mental perseverance, Jian Ruolin will definitely feel attracted. As she reflected on what had happened between the two of them last night, an indescribable warmth appeared on her face. She quickly went into the bedroom and tidied up the blankets. When she picked up the blanket, she could smell the unique scent that only belonged to Xian Zihao. It was a pleasant scent. Jian Ruolin could not refrain from sniffing the blanket again. As she was doing this, Zhan An's voice came from outside, calling them to eat. Jian Ruolin quickly made the bed and left. When she arrived at the dining room, Zhan An was already sitting at the table. She smiled at her. "Today, you have to go to work early, right? Then come and eat." "Thanks, Mom." Under Zhan An's expectant gaze, Jian Ruolin sat at the table and Xian Zihao entered at the same time. Xian Zihao was wearing a light brown casual shirt. The belt around his waist looked expensive and it's from a very nice leather. He looks very handsome. He first glanced at Jianan, who was eagerly waiting for him to sit down, and then glanced at Jiang Rulan lightly. As soon as he looked at her, Jiang Rulan's eyes were wide open, and her heart was beating wildly. Damn it! Jiang Rulan, you're an idiot. It turned out you were just like other women out there, easily bewitched by his face. If your emotions can be shifted so easily, then what was the difference between you and Han Shuigang? Jiang Rulan secretly warned herself to stay calm and ignore Xian Zihao's gaze. She quietly took a deep breath, accepting that today was a very strange morning for her. She scooped porridge for Jianan, then took Xian Zihao's bowl and scooped the porridge into his bowl as well. Mom, you've been busy all morning. Hurry and eat, don't wait for us. All right. Zihao, hurry up and eat. Jianan smiled as she took the spoon and distributed the side dishes into their bowls. Xian Zihao glanced at the porridge and the dumplings on the table. I found this dumpling in the fridge. It was frozen. I saw that this was your favorite vegetarian dumpling, so I cooked some. It was great to eat with this porridge. Jianan pushed the plate of dumplings to his side. Xian Zihao was obviously being pampered by his mother, and Jiang Rulan was secretly envious of him. However, when she caught a glimpse of his mouth twitching, she couldn't help but ask softly, "Why aren't you eating?" Xian Zihao glanced at the bowl in front of Jiang Rulan. A trace of teasing flashed across his eyes. He looked at Jianan and asked, "Are you sure it is really edible?" Jiang Rulan had noticed that the porridge did not taste good, but she just kept quiet. Lowering her head to take a sip, she suddenly heard what Xian Zihao had said and slowly raised her head to look at Jianan before turning back to look at him. Zihao. Jianan immediately put down her spoon and glared at her bratty son. How many years since have you been eating something made by your mother? Xian Zihao raised an eyebrow, pretending to think hard. He took the spoon and casually stirred the porridge in his bowl with a smile. Maybe it's been more than 10 years. But Mom remembered that year when you ran into the kitchen to cook something for us. The stuff you made caused your family to vomit and had diarrhea for almost a week. Guiying even admitted to the hospital at that time, almost losing half her life due to food poisoning. Putting the spoon in Jiang Rulan's hand fell into the bowl. Upon seeing her reaction, Jianan glared at Xian Zihao, who was laughing wickedly. It was clear that her son did not like her cooks, so she turned to Jiang Rulan, who looked like she had lost her life. Rulan, don't listen to Zihao's nonsense. Didn't he say that it was more than 10 years ago? At the time, Mom's cooking skills were not very good, but I have improved after many years. Also, I was in the United States with Guiying all these years, so of course, she had tasted my porridge and she was alive as well. Jiang Rulan blinked as she stared at Jianan pleading face. How could she dare to discourage her? Even if it was poison, she wouldn't dare to not drink it. Jiang Rulan grinned. Mom, what are you saying? My hand just slipped. You work hard to prepare breakfast for us, so why aren't you eating? As she said this, she astonishingly glanced at Xian Zihao, who clearly wanted to stay away from the problem and not get involved. Jiang Rulan pushed the bowl in front of him a little closer, giving him a side look. At the same time, she gave a smile like a pious wife and said, Zihao, you should eat it. Mom has been working hard all morning. Xian Zihao's face darkened. As Jiang Rulan pushed the bowl back towards him, she saw Jianan nod with a satisfied smile on her face. She pushed the plate of dumplings towards Xian Zihao again and said, Eat quickly. Aren't you supposed to go to your company at 8 o'clock? You will be late if you do not eat now. Xian Zihao glared sharpened, and it was as he was stabbing her with a knife. Their gazes met, 2 bolts of lightning could be heard colliding in the air. Mom, you eat too. Jiang Rulan immediately withdrew her gaze and casually pushed the hair on her forehead to the side. She looked delighted with herself as she picked up the spoon and swallowed the porridge carefully. How was it? Was it delicious? The mother and son beside her spoke at the same time. Jian Rulan kept her head down and tried her best to swallow the porridge. She then widened her eyes and smiled brilliantly. Delicious. Really? Xian Zihao immediately frowned and looked at the sincere smile in Jian Rulan's eyes with hesitation. He finally picked up the spoon and glanced at the bowl of porridge with hesitation. Why did it smell weird? Rulan said it was delicious, but you don't want to give a face to your mother. Having the support of her daughter-in-law, Jianan immediately pouted at Xian Zihao. Xian Zihao was speechless. He finally took a sip and swallowed it after a long while. Jian Rulan was laughing so hard that her stomach hurt. She covered her mouth with her hands. How is it? Good, isn't it? Jianan's eyes shone brightly as she looked at her son happily. Xian Zihao barely swallowing it. He opened his mouth and hesitated for a moment before finally saying, Rulan was right. It was delicious. Jianan was thrilled, however, when she heard, but, from Xian Zihao, her smile immediately faded. But what? Mom. Xian Zihao put down the spoon and asked, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, are you sure this is beef? If not beef, then what is it? Of course, it is beef. Jianan rolled her eyes and lowered her head to take a sip herself. Just as she was about to put it in her mouth, she paused for a moment before raising her eyes to look at Xian Zihao, whose face had already darkened. Why does it smell so bad? Jianan smacked her lips, this is not beef. Xian Zihao glanced back at Jian Rulan, only to see her looking like deer caught in headlights. That, Mom. Jian Rulan tried her best to hold back her laughter while looking at Jianan hesitantly. Although you used mutton, the taste of this porridge is quite unexpected, it is still delicious. Mutton. Jianan exclaimed, Aya. I saw a few small pieces of meat in the fridge, almost all of them looking the same, so I took one. Isn't this beef? Xian Zihao suddenly took the dumplings and put them in his mouth, immediately putting down his chopsticks. This time, he had no expression or comment. He just said in a very indifferent tone, if you really plan to stay here for a while, I think I should hire a nimbly and diligent nanny. Jianan's self-confidence was severely hurt. Son. Mom, you've actually improved. Xian Zihao looked at her with a sincere face. The porridge is not bad. As long as you use the right meat, set the right timer, and add a lighter seasoning, it will definitely be a pot of delicious food. Set the right timer. Jianan raised her eyebrows. If this was a cartoon, you will see a light bulb flashing over her head. I suddenly remembered that I forgot to set the timer for the rice cooker. Xian Zihao's eyelids twitched as he glanced sideways at Jian Rulan, who was stuffing her mouth with dumplings. Jian Rulan slowly raised her head and laughed out loud when she saw that they were both looking at her. The mother and son pair looked at each other in tacit understanding. Jianan took the dumplings with her chopsticks but did not eat them. She just opened it a little and saw that the filling was still raw. She immediately pulled a long face and sighed. Why does this happen? Jian Rulan was impressed with Jianan's behavior and she suddenly feels curious and wanted to know more about Xian family. The strict and old-fashioned father, the eccentric grandfather, and the childish yet cunning mother. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Jian Rulan was stunned. It was only 7 o'clock in the morning, who would come at this time? I'm going to open the door. Jian Rulan got up from her chair. She was afraid that the person outside the door was Jiang Yijuan. To avoid his sudden appearance causing misunderstanding, she hurriedly walked and opened the door. When she saw that it was not Yijuan, Jiang Rulan was stunned and her hand unconsciously fell from the doorknob. Hello. Cui Lucien smiled sweetly at her, our godmother and Zihao here. Godmother. Jiang Rulan looked at the uninvited guest hesitantly. They. Before she could finish her words, Chui Lucien pushed the door and walked past her as if she was the owner of this house. Jiang Rulan froze on the spot. For a moment, she was confused. Wasn't this her house? Why was it that before she couldn't even say a single word, the other party entered her house as she wanted and without her permission too? That's right, she only stayed here for 2 months. The house belongs to Xian Zihao, and not her house. Jiang Bingqing said that Chui Lucien was Xian Zihao's childhood sweetheart, so she may come here often, right? Then, the so-called uninvited guest was Chui Lucien or her, Jiang Rulan. Mom, you're really here. Chui Lucien yelled happily as soon she saw Zhanhan. She wrapped her arms around her, Xian Shuren, shoulders, rubbing against her in a spoiled manner. Please don't argue with my godfather. Actually, you can't blame godfather or Zihao. Zihao wasn't willing to marry her too. Lucien, why are you here? Xian Shuren didn't take heart with Chui Liuxian's words. With a kind smile, she patted her hands. Zihao and Rulan were having breakfast. Anyway, this food was cooked by me. Do you want to try it? Chui Lucien was startled. She glanced at the table and immediately scoffed. Mom, why do you have to prepare breakfast? If you are upset with outsiders, you can come and stay at my place. I also have a house in this district. The house that Zihao bought for me last year. It's just opposite this building, and I don't come to stay often. Although Chui Liuxian's tone was soft and tender, but, that outsiders' words sounded like a bomb. Zhanhan immediately looked at Jiang Rulan, who had returned. She opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Jiang Rulan cut her. Mom, you guys chat. I'm going to work. She went to the sofa to get her bag. Xian Zihao, who had been silent and expressionless since Chui Lucien entered the house, saw a glimpse of Jiang Rulan's sudden movement. He got up from his chair and was about to follow her when Chui Lucien suddenly wrapped her arms around him. Oh right, Zihao, the daughter of the Ling family is getting engaged next week. Did you get the invitation as well? Will you go with me?